Hello everyone, my name is Sharon and I will be presenting on the philosopher for the week. So moving aside from the European philosophers that we've been studying the last few weeks, we're now diving into an American philosopher by the name of William James. Here's an overview of the different things that I will be covering in this presentation, such as the background of William James, Charles Sanders Peirce, another pragmatist, the concept of pragmatism, and then its stance in regards to belief, the will to believe, truth, free will and determinism, morality, heroic life, pragmatic religion, and then lastly, the additional reading. So William James spent a majority of his childhood moving around due to his father being a very restless man. In 1855, the family moved to Europe because his father no longer believed in the American education system. So James went to school in Geneva for a few months, but then they moved to England, France, back to the US, and then Switzerland. In 1861, William James entered Harvard as a chemistry major, and while he was a student, James became severely depressed. He left school for a little while and went to Germany, but eventually came back and passed his licensing exam at the age of 26. It was said that James was saved from his depression by a French philosopher named Charles Renouvier. Renouvier characterized free will as the ability to hold on to one idea among a number of possibilities. And James decided to get well upon hearing this and willed himself well by concentrating all of his mental energy to produce, quote-unquote, the self-governing resistance of the ego to the world. Due to this, James's depression lightened, and as a result of the sickness and unhappiness he endured during depression, he decided to study the relationship between the mind and the body. In 1876, James fell in love with a young woman named Alice Gibbons, and after a very lengthy and complicated relationship, they married 2 years later. So before we further explore James, we are going to look into Charles Sanders Peirce, who is actually the first to express pragmatism in his work How to Make Our Ideas Clear in 1878. He coined the term pragmaticism from the Greek word pragma, which means an act or consequence. Peirce argued that ideas are meaningful only when they translate into actions and predict experiences associated with actions, and meaningful ideas always make a practical difference. So like Peirce, James yearned for a philosophy free of meaningless abstractions. James went beyond Peirce's intentions and used pragmatism to present a moral theory and to make a case for a religious belief. He attempted to present a philosophy that could provide values and ideals worth striving for and that could satisfy our need to believe without appealing to metaphysical abstractions. So James regarded philosophy as a matter of personal involvement, a function of the will, and as a means to overcome despair and futility. He developed this kind of philosophy in order to help him cope with his own life. Pragmatism is not meant to be a male philosophy, but a philosophy that includes an element of heroic struggle, a philosophy of courage and action, and then a philosophy of vitality. James is calling us to become consciously responsible for our lives by strenuous exertion of will, and he refused to offer a system, but instead offered a method of rationalizing the will. And he rejected any philosophy that lacked any practical payoff or cash value. In regards to the method and philosophy of pragmatism, this is what James had to say. The whole function of philosophy ought to be to find out what definite difference it will make to you and me, a definite instance of our life, if this world formula or that world formula be the true one. So what James meant by this was that pragmatism was meant to be a method for solving problems that interfere with feelings at home. The pragmatic method in such cases is to try to interpret each notion by tracing its respective practical consequences. So James sometimes referred to pragmatism as a creed. A philosophical creed is a body of beliefs we can devote our lives to. And on the opposite end, a philosophical argument is an attempt to make a rational case. While the first appeals to our hearts, the latter appeals to our minds. Pragmatism has been called philosophically crude due to its indifference to theoretical precision and consistency. And our lives are shaped by our beliefs, and our opinions are settled by the will to believe. So James refused to confine philosophy to solely the intellectual realm. He believed the function of philosophy shifted from revealing the truth to learning how to live in the world. And pragmatic philosophy is meant to provide a way of becoming better adjusted to the world. James categorized individuals into two different temperamental types. Number one, tender-minded, and number two, tough-minded. He thought philosophy had been dominated by extremists, so most philosophies are unbalanced in either the tough or tender direction. And because we are so easily persuaded, James believed that society ends up either trying to follow the most impressive philosopher in the neighborhood or none at all. And when we try to live according to beliefs that do not suit us, we eventually become very dissatisfied. So James tried to find the cause, how to find beliefs worth living, fighting, and dying for. And here's just a chart of the different characteristics of the tender-minded individual and then the tough-minded individual. And as we can see, they're very opposite of one another. According to James, we live according to beliefs that are products of our own temperaments and experience, and that our beliefs are not the products of abstract reasoning. We always find reasons to believe what we want and need to believe. Because life demands a response and action, we have no choice but to believe something, so we are forced into options, and we cannot remain detached or disinterested. Rationalists believe truth to be universal, taken from logic and mathematics, but James rejected this notion and said that experience makes it clear that ideas become true. So, in other words, truth happens to an idea. We decide whether or not an idea is true by testing it, and we accept ideas as true only after we test them against our past experiences. So, in terms of determinism, James agreed with most moral philosophers that free will is a necessary condition for moral responsibility, and he argued this in his famous essay titled The Dilemma of Determinism. So, determinism is the belief that everything that happens must happen exactly the way that it does, and it is inevitable since all matter is governed by cause and effect and follows the laws of nature. Possibilities are identical to actualities, and the future is already contained in the present. There is no rational ground for moral feelings because ought can have no meaning. Our deep, unshakable moral sense of right and wrong combined with our feelings of regret make a compelling case for our need and right to believe in free will. So as we all know, change, surprise, and chance are all regular parts of our experiences in our lives, and our inner sense of freedom was used to verify James's claim. We tend to have a deep spiritual need to believe that we are active agents who exert control over significant aspects of our lives, and that we affect events, and that we make a difference. We need this belief for our spiritual and mental well-being, and we have a right to believe in whatever we need to believe. This better serves our need for moral rationality. And neither belief can be conclusively rejected. James argued that we actually have the right to test belief in free will against our regular experiences. And if it pays more than believing that we have no control over our lives, then clearly it is the superior belief. In regards to morality, James argued that the only way to understand the good life was to study what people actually want and strive for, and the essence of good is simply to satisfy demand. We have basic obligations to maximize our satisfactions and minimize frustrations for ourselves and others. James did not believe in universal moral principles or in the possibility of any finite, closed expression of morality. In terms of life, James believed that life without heroic struggle is a dull, mediocre, and an empty life. He believed that there were two approaches. One, choosing safety, security, and compliance, and then the second, danger, courage, and risk. And he believed that the real fight for something important was the struggle between good and evil. Struggle and effort are vital elements of the good life, and the natural fact of life is an active, strenuous approach is healthier and more satisfying than a passive, easygoing one. James has had a great respect for religion because it enriches lives and has cash value. People in all cultures turn to a God who gets things done, an active God, and a God of the strenuous mood, not a passive, ineffective God. James suggested maybe that if people do not believe in God, it might be because God is not doing anything in their lives. But he concluded that religious faith is important on pragmatic grounds due to its presence or absence making an observable difference in our lives. So there are two basic personalities in the religious category, the healthy-minded individuals and the morbid-minded individuals. The healthy-minded look out and see that all things are good, and they're vital, enthusiastic, and exuberant. However, the morbid-minded are based on the persuasion that the evil aspects of our life are its very essence, and that the world's meaning most comes home to us when we lay them most to heart. And they tend to be negativistic and pessimistic people. So, is life worth living? James believed that the will to believe whatever is necessary answers this question. And like Kierkegaard, he believed that subjectivity is greater than objectivity. He also believed that beliefs are merely adaptations. They can be justified if they help us navigate our way through life. But he didn't think that encouraging wholehearted faith in necessary beliefs is the same thing as asserting that any belief that one holds is necessary simply because one holds it. And lastly, truth is not the chief value, but usefulness is. So James came to the inconclusive conclusion that since nothing can be proved one way or the other, each one of us is entitled to believe whatever he or she wants to believe. And since belief in scientific method is merely one belief competing among many different possible beliefs, belief in a scientific method is no more sacrosanct than any other belief. So in summary, William James sought to construct a philosophical religion that could provide beliefs worth living and dying for. Pragmatism rejects any philosophy that lacks cash value. People are divided into tough and tender-minded types. The pragmatic life rejects determinism as incompatible with our immediate sense of freedom. The heroic life is a real fight for something important. And lastly, religious faith is important in that it makes a difference in people's lives. So the additional reading that is optional to students that aren't doing the presentation this week was actually the publication of the lecture series called Pragmatism by William James in 1907. It was written in completely first-person point of view, and like this presentation, it addressed pragmatism in all aspects of our life, but in his words. So the aspects such as philosophy, religion, truth, and belief were all touched upon. And if you are so interested in reading more into this, these are located in the resource tab of Sakai. But here's the end. I want to thank you all for listening to my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it and gained an appreciation for this American philosopher. And following this presentation will be some hopefully stimulating questions and responses. So again, I thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I hope you all have a great week. Thanks.